Dreams while you're feeling blue. Dreams, that's the thing to do. Dreams while there's smoke rings floating in air. You'll find your share of memories there. So dream.
Judd, before we get to the combat things that I know were a good part of your experience, can you tell me how and why you wound up in the Navy in the first place?
In 1940, all available young men were signed up for the draft. And actually, my number was coming up fairly soon, but quite a number of my friends had already been called into the service. And I preferred not to go into the Army. I preferred to take the Navy. And I also had a friend who was the recruiter for the Navy who lived just 3 doors down from me in the YMCA where I lived at that time in Grand Junction. So I signed up with him, and then of course the groups of us, almost a whole trainload of us, had to go to Denver for examinations. It wasn't until the February 27th of 1942 that I was signed up. And it was about a week later that they called us into Denver when they had a train load to go to San Diego. There were 601 of us on that one train to go into the training base. As we were marching along, I happened to be on the outside line of 8 of us across and in formation. And as we were going in, all of the fellows that had been in there for 3 or 4 weeks and thought that they were old timers already, why they were standing out there hollering at the new recruits and showing them their haircuts and and all of the things that they had happen. And the thing was that there were some of those boys that were right here from Cedar Edge and Grand Junction and the areas where I had worked. And they were just saying, "Oh, look how you will be, look how you'll be." And like I told this one fellow, I said, "Why don't you keep quiet?" He was a boy that I had in Boy Scouts in Cedar Edge. And he started to holler, "Hey, Mr. Hart, Mr. Hart." And he ran up and down the line. And it happened to be that I probably knew 100 of the fellows that were and that standing there. And of course, they were all hollering, "Hi, Judd, hi, Mr. Hart," and on down the line.
When the commanding officer of the incoming 165-man company noticed the commotion surrounding Judd, he looked into his enlistment record, noting his age, then 27, his former service in the National Guard and the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the respect paid to him by other recruits. This persuaded him to appoint Judd as the recruit chief petty officer of the company. Near the end of basic training, men in the company were tested to determine each one's deployment qualifications. 16, including recruit CPO Hart, were deployed to officer training school in Boulder, Colorado. Although in San Diego he had boarded the train to Boulder, at the last minute it was discovered that the officer training program had an upper age limit of 25. Judd, being 27, was pulled from the train and the program.
It was just a short time later that I was selected to go to Keyport, Washington, to the torpedo school and torpedo base to become a torpedoman. But when we graduated towards either June or July I was one of 7 that became a third-class torpedoman. From there, we were sent to San Francisco to what was called Goat Island, where we were separated into groups to go to different places to catch our ships. My group went on the old transport Henderson to out to Honolulu, to Pearl Harbor. And I knew that I was to go with the USS O'Brien.
The O'Brien was your ship, though.
Yeah, the O'Brien was a destroyer, DD 415. Our group was the last one to leave the base there because the Hornet Task Force had been out, and that was when they had the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. So the Hornet Task Force was a little bit late in getting in to pick us up, so we were a little bit late there. And then across the equator and down into the towards Australia and that area down there in the islands. And we were a small part of putting the Marines on Guadalcanal.
On Tuesday, 15 September 1942, the combined task forces of the aircraft carrier Wasp and Hornet, together with the battleship North Carolina, and 10 other warships, including the destroyer O'Brien, were operating some 170 miles southeast of San Cristobal Island, part of the Solomon Islands. They were escorting transports carrying troops of the 7th Marine Regiment to Guadalcanal as reinforcements. This area of the Coral Sea was known to sailors as Submarine Alley. The Wasp Task Force was operating on the western side of the flotilla, and the Hornet Task Force, including the O'Brien, was 3 or 4 miles to the east. That morning, Wasp aircraft that had flown anti-submarine missions earlier in the morning had been refueled, while 11 aircraft were still airborne. At about 14:20 in the afternoon, Wasp turned into the wind to launch 8 Wildcat and 18 Dauntlesses and recover the 8 aircraft aloft since before noon. Meanwhile, Japanese submarine I-19 with Commander Takakazu Kinashi at the helm lay in wait to the west. Through his periscope, Commander Kinashi sighted the Wasp in the midst of its launches and recovering. As the Wasp began to turn to starboard, Kinashi fired a spread of 6 torpedoes. 1444, a lookout aboard the Wasp spotted 3 torpedoes, 3 points forward of her starboard beam. Wasp put her rudder hard to starboard in an effort to avoid the salvo, but 3 struck. Midship, inflicting fatal damage.
We had just refueled and we were separated, and there was a submarine, and the first ship, of course, that they were after, they torpedoed the Wasp.
3 of I-19's torpedoes missed Wasp, but continued to churn eastward. At 14:52, as O'Brien's lookout spotted the Wasp burning, O'Brien went to general quarters, airtight integrity. O'Brien accelerated and made an emergency turn starboard to help screen the Hornet. At about 14:54, an O'Brien lookout spotted a torpedo 2 points forward of the port beam about 1,000 yards away. O'Brien's accelerated pace steamed it past that torpedo, it missing close astern by only 4 or 5 feet. While O'Brien's crew was focused on that torpedo, the destroyer steamed directly into another of I-19's torpedoes that struck O'Brien on the port bow.
When we were hit, we torpedomen went under the torpedo tubes. Well, the torpedo tubes have spaces between each one of them so that if there's a hot run, it can't transfer over to another one.
Right.
Well, this piece came down right between the torpedo tube, and of course, from that picture, you can see how much is in the air.
Right.
There, and a piece came down and hit me in the back. Of course, we were so badly damaged that it put us almost out of commission. We were able to do about 7 or 8 knots an hour, and of course, we broke off from the task force immediately to try to get into an island. The torpedo had thrown our ship completely off balance, and they had to steer, I think it was 7 or 9 degrees to the left all the time to make a straight course. And as we met ships, as we went along, if they had a pump, an extra pump, we would pull alongside and pick up an extra pump to help us pump the water. That was because our seams were kind of sprung all the way around. And we went into several different islands. Of course, that took days. And of course, nobody was sleeping below decks. We were all staying above decks because we were actually in a sinking condition.
Fortunately, the sea was rated moderate to no swell, and O'Brien was able to steam forward at about 13 knots. She arrived 16 September at the New Hebrides island of Espiritu Santo, where the Navy had a station, codenamed Button, and a maintenance ship, USS Curtis, there principally to service floating patrol bomber aircraft known as PBYs. O'Brien remained at Button while the 7th Naval Construction Battalion aboard Curtis made temporary repairs, mainly patching bulkhead holes, reinforcing bulkheads with concrete, and divers installing plugs and patches in the bottom plating of the forward engine room. She was lightened by removal of depth charges and ammunition. O'Brien left Button on 21 September with a course set for Nouméa, New Caledonia, codenamed White Poppy, 600 miles distant. She arrived 23 September. She remained at White Poppy until 10 October, while the crew of the destroyer tender Argonne made further structural repairs, and additional weight was removed, including 11 torpedoes, 12,000 rounds of 20mm ammunition, and 8 300-pound depth charges. After repairs at White Poppy, it was thought that O'Brien could maintain 15 knots in a moderate sea. Its destination was Mare Island, San Francisco. On 10 October, O'Brien departed White Poppy in the company of tanker Cimarron and destroyer Lang. After sailing 860 miles, these 3 ships, now designated Task Force 63.3, next arrived at Suva, Fiji on 13 October. Cimarron began to deliver its gasoline and oil to Suva Naval Station. Being slower, O'Brien departed Suva 16 October with Cimarron and Lang to follow. After getting underway, O'Brien observed a slow increase in leakage in the forward engine room, but pumps were able to handle it. O'Brien crossed the date line, so 16 October was repeated. By 18 October, the rate of leakage had increased substantially. Formerly patched cracks were opening up. O'Brien changed course to Pago Pago, Samoa. O'Brien's crew began to unbolt and jettison everything they could to lighten the ship.
About the second day or third day, we got into a bad storm. We began to actually break up, and they had to abandon the fire room and the engine room because the piping was going to be bursting and would scald anybody that was down below deck. So we sat there, and for 2 days we wallowed in the water, and we jettison all the ammunition, the torpedoes, the depth charges. I know I was taking apart some parts on forward torpedo tubes, and my first class torpedoman said, "Hey Hart, I want that 1-inch wrench you got there." So as I handed it back, the deck began to buckle right between us.
Oh.
So he said, "You guys go forward and we'll go aft, and because we're going to have to abandon ship." There forward, we were clear up on towards the bow and quite high, and there was about a 12-foot rise in the wave, and in fact it was slapping some of the fellows back into the ship, and I didn't especially like the looks of that. So I walked down and I went off there, and from up above, why, I could see the commander and 3 or 4 other officers on the bridge, and they were watching as it went over. So when I stepped over the rail on that, I watched the wave as it came up, and of course I had my life jacket on, and at a certain point, why, I just made a belly flop right out there, and it took me about 40 or 50 feet. Just took me right out. I thought I might be in trouble with it because he might report me. But anyway, when I just turned over on my back and looked out, and the commander with his megaphone was calling down, and here was the string of fellows coming down to go off the same place I did.
Mm-hmm.
And see, the reason that they were going off on the one side was that they had put all of the life rafts and the 2 motorboats were on that side.
Oh, okay.
On 19 October, all hands abandoned ship was completed by 0700. O'Brien began her death throes. At 0746, both bow and stern took a sharp, permanent upward set. At 0753, she rolled slowly and deeply starboard. The ends slowly folded together. At 0757, the stern went under, followed by the bow. There were no explosions. O'Brien had steamed 1,027 miles from Suva, and altogether about 2,800 miles from the site of its torpedo wing. Cimarron picked up the crew. There was no loss of crew from either the torpedo wing or the sinking. Cimarron arrived in San Francisco 1 November 1942. O'Brien's crew members were issued new uniforms and gear, were paid, and received a 30-day survivor leave, enabling them to be home for Thanksgiving. While on leave, the men from the O'Brien were able to select their next deployment, and after Thanksgiving at home, traveled to a port for their next assignment.
Dreams while you're feeling blue. Dreams, that's the thing to do. Dreams while there's smoke rings floating in air. You'll find your share of memories there. So dream